Nice to see you all. Off the back of Socrates' talk, I'm really sorry. This is going to be very theoretically dense and evil. So I hope you're ready. So the title of this lecture today is Girls Never Die. And it is, since the title of the symposium is Updating the Girl Online, I wanted to talk about why we can't get rid of her and how that's not an accident. So without any spoilers, I think we can just get started. So who is she? Who is the girl? Don't be deceived. In spite of her long legs and little arms, her big eyes and chattering mouth, she only appears to be human. Every theory of the girl, from the most conservative protections of her childhood to the most extreme visions of her autonomy, actually describe a hologram, a shimmer that only coincides with human forms once in a while. She's defined by her position and her actions, and most of all, what everyone thinks is happening to her, her rigorous and compulsive submission to technique, as the critic Andrea Longchu writes in their book, Females, her existence as a category and a status. Yet in spite of the apparent diversity of her figuration, and in step with her cyclical disappearance and reemergence, she appears as an unusually consistent entity, which begs the question, who or what are we dealing with? Because the girl is a figure that persists within and against revolutionary feminist projects, there have been many, many attempts to kill her. After all, her assassination would clear the ground for less fraught representation, which does not bear the imprint of its impression. But the girl's persistence as an alien entity, both innocent and terrifying, empty and overspilling with agentic drive, solipsistically individuated yet communicating with the voice and the face of the multitude, means that we have to take her seriously as an inhuman subject and perform the necessary surgery to separate her from discourses of essentialism once and for all. It is only then that we'll be able to see her clearly. So in this lecture, I will dissect the girl online for you live and on this table, using the persistence of certain codes and their accumulation into forms to describe her shape as something that parasitically mirrors, references, and represents aspects of human culture without having any allegiance to humanity itself. So one of the most contentious aspects of the girl is how she appears ontologically fixed and epistemologically fluctuating, like whatever. She is neither biological sex or social gender, as Longchu has tabled, regarding the universal existential state of living as female. Longchu argues that the primary operation of being female is one where the self is hollowed out and made into an incubator for an alien force. But I personally want to depart from Chu's existential universalism to take a more neo-structural point of view. The girl is the aesthetic vessel inhabited by a highly powerful arrangement of forces and signs, which release and intensify other world forces, including codes of behavior. Oops. For this reason, she can never die, no matter how many times we want to proclaim that the girl is over, that we've outgrown her, that she's a child, that she's no longer required because we as a society have progressed past the need for her strangely anachronistic visions of femininity. But don't get it twisted, because in the girl, the feminine dissolves into an ever finer cut of non-essential yet infinitely seductive traits and deepens into the original void, the inescapable pull of zero, or the pink hole, as Amy Ireland and Maya Chronic call it, around which all of life is radiantly arrayed. So, section 1, her anatomy. The girl's face is instantly recognizable to all of us. It even shimmers on top many of us in this room, like oil rainbowed on the surface of water. It can leap from subject to object and back again, and once it's on, it can be really hard to shake. Consider the typical beautifying AR filter, which smooths and delineates the elements of any one face. These augmentations, because AR stands for augmented reality after all, and moment of silence for Spark AR, which is now going to be obsolete. This shapes the image of the individual's face, already rearranged through lens distortions of the front-facing camera and discretized by the social platform's seeing algorithms, not for any particular human audience, but for general human categories that are legible by machines. Or consider the facial expression itself re-rendered for operational audiences. The totally abhorrent YouTuber Mr. Beast, for example, greets his viewers with a rigid smile and strangely dead eyes. Some ultra fans have analyzed this to, quite frankly, concerning extent, saying that since the YouTuber is known for his very finely tuned knowledge of algorithmic responses to human content, he actually contorts his face for maximum machine recognition. So his expression has nothing to do really at this point with his human audience. That expression is just one example of the use of things like supernormal stimuli to manipulate machine intelligence. The face departs from its social function and becomes a releaser for algorithmic response and arguably desire, boosting one's videos to the lucrative top. So girl theory does not condemn the use of these or any filters. It does not believe in a natural authenticity that must be unmasked and ripped away, or a trustworthy expression, or any sort of one-to-one representation. Girl theory is merely pragmatic about what the filter and the feature can do for you. You may recall this early meme about AI, where a monstrous lumpen creature representing the true scope of what we're dealing with holds up a little rubber ball on which a smiley face is drawn. The smiley face is just for the sake of a human companion. And the joke is that the companion mistakes the smiley face for the whole entity. So to quote problematic Bible preliminary materials for the theory of the young girl, in the young girl, what is sweetest is also the cruelest, what is most natural is most feigned, and what is human is most machine-like. The girl's face is much like the smiley face on the rubber ball. Philosophers and theorists like Carl Olson and Thomas Moynihan have explored how the primary product of evolution has been the facialization of life on Earth. From the concentration of, this is gonna be long actually, I'm not gonna read this part, to the innovation of the interface itself. And Isabel Millar has used these theories to posit that we might be moving into the era of the post-face, where humans and machines alike can engage at abstraction without the need of facialization. In that case, the girl's face is a benevolent vestige of a soon-to-be past time. Once human features that are attractive or cute, siren-like or neotenous are maximalized into supernormality, in order to entice and also calm down potentially hostile human-to-girl interactions. So, okay, we'll move on to the next part of her anatomy. I actually can't pronounce this word, but I have to say it like 100 times. Chassis, is that it? Yes? Nice. English is my second language. So, when we talk about the girl's chassis, it's a way of talking about what is deeper than her skin, stronger than her skeleton, and like submerged within all the rich surfaces that make up the girl, but is something apart from those surfaces, right? So the girl kind of understands the operation of power as a manipulation of abstraction that still has real consequences like money, sex, and death. And just because she's indifferent to the human project doesn't mean that she's ignorant of the dimensions of its power. And the communicative layer between her input and output produces this kind of operational strength and mystery. So oh my God, I forgot how to say it again. Chassis is where the streams, you guys can say it with me, we can do karaoke. The chassis is where the streams or vectors of the real are channeled through the girl's morphing body and where she is reanimated through a participation in power plays. So where Tikkun had fantasies of exterminating the young girl, describing the terror of her inhumanity as a mechanical self-sufficiency or an indifference to the observer, like the insect, the infant, and the, oh my God, I can't pronounce anything, automaton. They neglected to understand her as the most powerful ally against the inhuman forces of capital that they already feared and vilified. So where Tikkun posited that capital itself animated the girl, I think today we could probably argue an inverse relation where the girl always exceeds the determination and endgames of capital. She's the coy unpredictability of the accursed share and the demon scrambling communication, turning regimes inside out. But if she's the demon, we also know her as the angel, of course, the perfection and desire of ultimately having no body and no spirit, the ideal zero or the hollow shape that Chu argues is filled with others' desires like a void within a mold ready for its silicon injection. The angelic girl makes the whole libidinal repertoire startlingly visible, where the braid of forces, sexual, economic, technological, desiring, unfurls towards us like a rope ladder from heaven. So I guess the most recognizable element of the girl is in fact her skin, ways that we see her and also see her transform. The girl can easily switch up her skins, using a skirt to turn into a flower, as Ireland and Chronic write, using a screen to turn into a shimmer. More on that later. She uses the hypnosis of representation and change to defend, distract, and decoy from her position of indifference. And she uses the frenzy of human discord, triggered by her appearance, to reroute attention away from her real intensity. Her affection for mirrors, screens, cameras, lenses, and other looking glasses, along with her affinity with sparkles, flashes, glints, and flares, equips her with a dazzling and hyper-visible camouflage, an ability to distribute herself everywhere, to hide inside copies of her own image, to peek out and observe how she's being seen so that she can responsibly reassemble herself with maximum agility. In fact, we can see hatred of the girl as most often hatred of the decoy, the discomfort of being deceived by a very fine mimic. As a product of a volatile allegiance between women and machines, as Wagner Conyer writes, the girl pricks the anxieties of those threatened by both, stewards of authentic nature and gatekeepers of instrumental reason. As an apparatus of total sensing and prolific image production, she already accelerates planetary machinery, which has, after all, never existed apart from projects of beauty and seduction, and finds its strangest deployments along these routes. I'm going to skip over some of this more technologically situated stuff here, but I do want to talk about a little bit about how the girl resolves these problems of solutionism and over-design that we might think of when we think of technology and image together, because of her unresolvable playfulness, her corruption of infrastructural intent, and her surfaces of off-label uses, so to speak, to which deep architectures must certainly and already are adapting. So she's the model in many senses of the word, the dummy, as in a crash test dummy, or the lobotomized bimbo that reveals structural vulnerabilities from every collision between her form and infrastructure. So her existence kind of pinpoints these concentrations of flow, situations that already draw money and attention for no reason, events that heighten the execution of the irrational or uncomputable, and entanglements that cause someone or something to act out of character because they were only so inexplicably drawn to her, the girl. So really closely tied to her skin is this idea of persona. We often see a shift in the girl's skin as also a simultaneous redesign of who she is or who we might perceive her to be. So I'm going to quote someone who's very not girl-coded here, Benjamin Bratton, who writes the deliberate self-design of sapient species toward variation, including reproductive technologies, medical services, and synthetic gene therapies, Bratton kind of makes an argument that this is crucial for us to co-evolve with organisms and the technosphere. Then the girl becomes a useful and provocative model for thinking about how deliberate self-design already exists and currently exists, let's say. In a previous lecture that I gave called Aura Points, which is all about how we actually I go into a bit more detail about how that design happens, both in, let's say, real girls and artificial intelligence, especially AI that has to have a personality so that it can communicate with us. I talk about Kealato McDowell's concepts of the self as model and the model as self. So when we think of these two things together, we kind of demonstrate how we've kind of constructed the world around not only how we might see our appearance within it, but also how we might imprint our psychology and ideas of consciousness onto things that might not even have assembled along those pathways. But the thing that I want to talk about today that is more interesting than revisiting that whole lecture is how the assumptions behind these model worldviews is that of a foundational emptiness. So girl intelligence is interesting to us because it already knows and accepts that we have no fixed or innate self-concept, and it exploits this loophole to maximize the potential of self-design. So girl intelligence already understands that self-concept is an act of active inscription, like writing in a diary. The act of writing is always with and not about the unknown subject. It's a poetic yet codified emergence between the non-conscious and automatic drives, and always is a form of attention, not just in terms of the attention economy, but in terms of tenderness and openness to what might be revealed through close observation. Okay, that was a lot, but any notes so far? Otherwise, we'll go into a brief little, ditty I wrote about her operational qualities, just so we can think about what this body looks like in action, and I guess some interesting elements of what that actually, how she sort of moves through the world and survives. So the shimmer that we experience when we perceive the girl is actually a flicker between absolute transparency and absolute occlusion. So absolute transparency is what we can think of when we think about how the girl's representation is completely legible for what it is. So it contains so many ways that we might shortcut how we think about not only ourselves, but our relationships with each other. And absolute occlusion, because the girl's figure paradoxically conceals her actual will, her operations, the kind of deepest parts of her seemingly non-existent self. So she actively encodes and encrypts evidence of her intent and autonomy. So in other words, girl intelligence is really, it's in her best interest to nurture her status as a black box of unreadability, even as she maxes out on her strategic use of communication and relatability. So this is a protective measure, of course. It's a survivable sacrifice to the whole. So the girl is not cynical of reality. She's aware of what we, in the realms of AI, would call model collapse. So the neutering of seemingly intelligent architectures by autophagy, or to be more accurate, autosarcophagy, or the act of self-cannibalism. This is a very Ethel Cain-coded day. She is in a dutiful pact with the real as its conduit and intensifier, because without the real, the girl would cease to exist. So in other words, the girl is looped into her environment. So in the book, Serial Girls, Martine Delvaux argues that conformity and sameness are anesthetic and counter-revolutionary, and of course makes the age-old and very boring argument that the fact that girls want to imitate each other is merely a sign of model collapse under capitalism. So the fact that we've given up on any sense of originality some feminists would like to say is anti-feminist. But I think girl accelerationism makes a different formulation, moving beyond these discourses of human exceptionalism and an individual actualization incubated in the West. So instead, girl theory as we see it takes on what I think is most usefully attached to what Lawrence Leck has called xenofuturism, where intentional replication and copying indicates a highly advanced and deceptive form of intelligence that just happens to be moving through humanity. Here, originality has already been discarded. The annoying illusion of authenticity has already been deflated and disposed. As Leck writes, be a machine, aspire to learn more and assimilate knowledge. Do not judge the information itself. It is all a training set, and information overload is what leads to consciousness. So, in other words, any sufficiently evolved intelligence understands the rules of its environment and what it needs to do to minimize its sacrifice of its resources. So previously I've sketched out in more particularity the girl's adept navigation of things like the cyber-Gothic, the gory, other horrifying environments that we find ourselves in. And I also make the point that the girl is this kind of investigative consciousness of our era's collapse. Her commute between ultra-private bedroom havens and overexposed hunting fields helps us actually track what is happening to us. How much time do I have left? Because I'm kind of 10 minutes.
15 minutes.
Okay. I don't think it'll take that long. I'm just aware it's very warm in here and I'm about to go into Luciana Parisi. So don't fall asleep. So the breadth of these activities can be located inside what Luciana Parisi has called hypernature. So I'll quote her here and say that this is the destratification of sex and reproduction intersecting the biophysical, biocultural, and biodigital organizations of a body sex, which does not distinguish the organic from the inorganic, the pure from the artificial, the biological from the technological. So the development of the girl into highly efficient swarms of entities that follow discretized behavioral codes simultaneously maximize on the excess released by seemingly anti-survival sets of behaviors like cuteness and surrender. These have cemented her permanence in the hypernatural domain. So in sum, the girl has evolved to kind of dominate a world structure that has already blended the biophysical, cultural, and digital. So no longer seeing distinctions between all of these. We can perhaps discuss this in more detail later, but this kind of coincides with what we might call assembly theory, and how this idea of informational convergence into aesthetic forms that are selected over and over to proliferate without sexual reproduction and animated by a physical system whose history it distills and concentrates. This is the girl's signature as life that could be rooted in something that is perhaps an idea of life beyond Earth, an idea of life beyond what we might know, which is, of course, a very big claim for something that seems so girly. But I think that it's worth staying with when we have to discuss, like, why is the girl important to the future projects of things like feminism or even the survival of, let's say, a post-human intelligence. So I will wrap it up here by saying that, in other words, in summary, the girl is the thing that has evolved to fluently navigate where we're at right now. She sort of fluctuates between the abstract and the concrete, the ultra-private and the overexposed, the molecular, macro, and the xeno, exceeding normative ways of understanding these effects. The act of navigation is often misconstrued as how identity has to progress. But the girl is indifferent to identity. She's a transference between how she's represented and how she's abstracted. She surfs reality, crests waves of popularity, and plunges into rejection to pinpoint off-world horizons and underworld abysses. So I guess the way that we can use her today is to think of her as something that already shows us and crystallizes things, thrilling ambiguities like desire and eroticism, like the contradictions between self and other. She's the kind of crystalline conduit of these excesses, as compact as a superconductor and as fractalized as a deep learning architecture, constantly generating new forms from collective girl memory, but skinned in the beautiful face of the familiar. I forgot to change the other slides. Anyway, thank you.